Hi everyone, this is Jove from Timeplus, and I'm wearing all the red clothes because today actually is the Chinese New Year. It's a big day for our Chinese community, but I'm also very glad to have our special guest, Avi from Scarf, and this might be a special podcast because we'll be talking about real-time processing analytics for sure, but we're also going to learn more about the business, how your platform empowered the open source go-to-market, and maybe some of the recent open source movement, cool projects. So maybe it will be great if you can just introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, well, hi everyone, and thanks, Joe, for having me. Yeah, my name's Avi Press. I'm the founder and CEO of Scarf, and we are a company that helps open source projects get better understanding of how their software gets used. We work with lots of companies that commercialize open source. We work with open source foundations, and what we do is we help track the usage of open source in a way that's privacy conscious and it doesn't leak any kind of sensitive details, but still can be useful for the maintainers and the developers that are building open source. I have a software engineering background as well, and was once in a position of having my own open source projects that were being used by big companies, but I didn't really have any good information about what was actually happening with it. And the package registries that I was using did not provide those kinds of stats. And so Scarf exists to basically solve that problem and try to help promote open source sustainability.
Yeah, cool. I guess I watched some of your talk in other meetups. So I guess at the very beginning, the company might start from as a gateway or as a proxy people can download, but in the same way that do some kind of caching and maybe some telemetry stuff. But yeah, I guess it's a real pain. The people in the open source side, no matter it's open core or whatever license, and we try to provide some value to the developers, but in the same time, we want to understand how they use it, which version they are on, and even which feature is more popular, and the distribution of things. And they are not really a lot of information we can get from GitHub, for example, right? So it's a real need. We also using your service too. So I guess it's really helpful to the people who maintain the project. But this is still, I guess, can I say this is still a niche market that is providing open source GTM tools and services?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that's definitely still in the fairly early days of the adoption lifecycle. I mean, for those listening who have been in the open source world for a long time, really any kind of usage analytics has been quite taboo for decades, really. And it's only a very recent thing that there has become more of an appetite to really understand the usage of the software. And I think that's largely just because open source became a lot more successful than anyone really expected, when it just started. But now when you have open source as the software foundation of pretty much every major piece of technology in the world, it becomes less and less acceptable to be pushing code out there and have no idea how it actually gets used. You would just never do that in like a web development context or with an app or these kinds of things. And increasingly, that's not as appropriate for open source as well. And so, yeah, overall, I think it's one of those things where, yeah, on the scheme of, I think, where this kind of technology will be in the long run, it's still definitely early days, but at the same time, it's really become quite a standard in a lot of different respects. And so the fact that we work with the Linux Foundation and the CNCF and the Apache Software Foundation are all formally approved and working with Scarf is something that I think would have been really hard to imagine 5 years ago when we got started. And so I think it's in one of those spots where it's still definitely on the more early stage of adoption throughout the open source space, but it definitely is becoming accepted by some of the largest organizations, by some of the largest open source foundations. And now today, Scarf is tracking over 1 billion open source downloads and interaction events every month. And I would say that's now starting to really constitute like real, probably like single digit % of like every interaction with open source that really happens in the world. And so I think that kind of progress has been really, really remarkable and something that I'm quite proud of. But yeah, there's still a long ways to go.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that is the people are more open to try some software from different foundation, and they use by themselves. And when they feel more comfortable, they might talk to their manager, their boss, to see whether there's a need to get some better service, some support. But yeah, I mean, having the open source version available, it's it's a more natural way for developer to try new things, to validate their assumptions and build some POC or MVPs. And so for the go-to-market stuff, or I guess for people who are not that familiar with your service, I mean, what kind of typical entry point you can acquire those data points?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to instrument these kinds of analytics. So one of the more novel ways, a service that we call Scarf Gateway, you can basically just think of it as a very transparent reverse proxy and redirect service that sits in front of any artifact anywhere on the internet. So you can imagine if you're distributing, maybe you have containers on Docker Hub, maybe you have Python packages on PyPI, and you have your tarballs on GitHub releases. Our gateway is going to give you one central place where people can download any of those artifacts, work with the container runtimes, the package managers, the browsers, all of these things. So kind of like a link shortener, but it'll be able to give one central place to download all of those artifacts, and it will just work with any of your software development tools. And then Scarf will analyze that traffic, do your analytics, and give you all these insights about the usage. That's just one way. We also have cookieless tracking pixels that can go in all of your open source documentation, any technical blog posts, websites, all of these things where you can start to track how people discover the project, then how they go to download it. And then if you want to, you can also use our SDKs and our APIs if you want to send telemetry from your code back to Scarf as well. And so then we're helping you track the entire adoption lifecycle, from how people learn about the project to how they start to get it for the first time, and then how they go on to use it and deploy it and beyond. And that's something that we do with absolutely zero PII that we store. So no sensitive or personally identifiable information gets kept, but we can still provide a lot of useful insights to the developers. And I think this marks a very important thing now, where basically anyone who uses the open source is now contributing in some way, where just by default, by using the software, you're helping the developers understand usage patterns of the user base, and that helps the maintainers quite a bit. And so I think it just really aligns users and developers in a more concrete way.
Cool. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of other things we can discuss regarding business, but also I'm very curious regarding your tech stack, right? Because assume this is more like on the analytics platform,
Yeah.
and as you mentioned, there are so many integration with the popular open source and foundations and say PyPI, and the data volume is massive and across the globe. I mean, how you guys set up a data stack not too expensive, not too complex, do the job well, but also leave the room for your future enhancements?
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely wish our cloud bill was lower, but we serve a lot of bandwidth. We have very high uptime requirements because our gateway sits in front of our users' images and artifacts, right? And so if Scarf goes down, these things will be, people have build outages and build pipeline errors and such. And so it's a very large responsibility. In terms of the tech stack, let's see. So the whole thing is deployed on AWS. We have a globally distributed architecture. So we have different data centers around the world. And when someone, for instance, downloads a tarball or a Python package on our platform, basically what we do is you're going to get routed to your closest data center through our globalized DNS. We also let you use your own domain. And so we will handle things like the SSL certificate issuance and, talking to Let's Encrypt. So you always have, your SSL the whole way through. And once the download happens, or once the event happens, those gateway nodes will basically send an event that gets put into a Kafka queue. And from there, we have batch scheduled jobs that are asynchronously pulling those events off of the Kafka queues. We then do things like IP address enrichment. So we'll try to understand which company was behind the download, where in the world did this come from, all the kind of things that you want to know about the traffic. From there, the event gets put, we'll parse an event and we will put that in a few different places. It goes into ClickHouse, where we'll serve up our real-time dashboards, and it'll also go into S3 as well, more cold storage for things like really broad event export and some of the larger but slower operations that we might want to have for later. What else can I say about our tech stack? The other thing that's interesting about our tech stack is the entire backend is written in Haskell, which I think is definitely a less common choice, but it works really well for us. It helps us write software that is very fast, but also very correct. We take our responsibility sitting in front of your artifacts very seriously, and we want to make sure that the software that we write is more provably correct. Haskell compiles down to native binaries, so get really good performance out of the box.
Yeah, it's always an interesting choice, right? For example, when I was in the other company, one of our team, they use Erlang, and they also have a framework.
I love her.
And they also build a very serious CDN, those things, and they don't want to move to other platform. I mean, it's really a barrier for other team to try to help or fix bugs, but it works so well, and you might have to work on the next gen stuff, but the current gen, it just works.
It's an interesting trade-off because I think picking more niche languages, I mean, especially when they're really well suited to the problem, I think can be a really strong benefit in the sense that when we need to hire engineers, we get a lot of really enthusiastic people who really want to work in that language. It also, for better and for worse, has definitely a steeper learning curve than a lot of other languages, which then I think really attracts like the programmers that really care about the craft of programming as well. And I think it's a similar thing with Erlang, right? Like it really selects people who agree with that philosophy of building these really durable systems that never go down. And so I think people that really feel strongly about the technology that they work with, I think, it can be a really good hiring boon as well. But it definitely comes with drawbacks too.
Okay, cool. And back to the tech stack, my understanding that is you have to making sure the basic feature like this, you access a certain proxy URL, it will help you to redirect to the right place and give you the package. That's the must-have part, right? And at the same time, I guess you introduce the Kafka or other things to making sure that in the same time there will be a message or information, a data point put somewhere, and it can be enriched or can be aggregated in whatever cadence, and you will generate some report or provide some real-time text alert, but that's on the second pass, right? So the main pass is to deliver the redirection, but in the same time, there's a bunch of data enrichment, data aggregations, and you also put data both in the, say, ClickHouse as OLAP and also in S3. Are you also going to use things like the cool boy in the street that is a iceberg, those open formats put into your data stack in the near future?
Yeah, we're not using Iceberg at the moment, but I think one of the really interesting announcements from AWS reInvent back in December was that now there's more support for Iceberg querying on CSVs right in S3. And so I think we're likely to start doing some amount of Iceberg usage over time. We're not really doing much of it today. Largely, we do most of our analytics, like both for serving up our dashboards in real time, but then also for internal like business analytics and BI type stuff is all from ClickHouse right now, which I think works really great because we can query all that stuff lightning quick. But yeah, I think over time, some of the more like big batch processing we're likely to do with tech like Iceberg.
Cool. So today the files on S3, is that more for like raw event in case people want to export the data?
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to like export your raw data out of Scarf, we're basically collecting these files out of the bucket and just streaming them right to you rather than hitting the database just for that. And it also means that when we prepare, like we can prepare the export asynchronously. If someone says, I want to export a year's worth of data, that might be many gigabytes worth of data. And so we end up basically preparing that bounded export for you in one file so you can then download it very quickly and just stream it right out of S3 through our CDN.
Cool. Yeah, I almost work with Kafka or related compatible platform every single day, and I'm curious to learn that is, say, when the data is put into the Kafka, and you mentioned there might be some, at least enrichment, right? So there's some service maybe expensive or super expensive to figure out whether the IP is coming from certain potential organizations, right? I mean, getting the IP from a certain city or country, that's the very basic. That's many services can do that, but there's also other services to give it a hint that is, maybe this is coming from KFC, this is coming from McDonald's, right? So for those services, I'm not sure how you enrich them. Is that part of the, say, a Kafka Connect platform, or you write your own consumer?
We just wrote our own consumers, yeah. So basically the idea is it's all pretty custom logic. And so we'll grab any event off the queue. And there's a couple of reasons why it's nice to architect it this way. So when things get pulled off the queue, we might look up the IP address details from many different data providers. And so we might get back, we might ask 5 different sources, hey, who's the company behind this request? We might get back 2 or 3 different answers, and then we aggregate all of those responses. Then we compute like a distribution probability of which company we think it is and how likely we are that we think that judgment is correct. But then what we do is we take that event, it gets discarded ultimately, but then we never end up having to write an IP address to the database. And so the sensitive data never actually touches ClickHouse. It never touches S3. It's never touching Postgres. I didn't mention Postgres, but that's where we're doing all the OLTP stuff. But it has these nice properties where we can set very specific policies on how we're handling the data that we consider to be sensitive, which is an IP address, and make sure that it's never really hitting the more durable long-term storage that we have behind us, but we have something durable enough where we can, maybe we take a few minutes or even a few hours to process the event if we're under really heavy load, and we can distribute the work very easily between all of our compute resources and make sure that, we might get slammed by traffic in one place or by one user, but the system will then be robust and handle the load gracefully.
Cool. Yeah, it's quite inspiring to see that is you actually use multiple those enrichment service, and I have a task. Go figure out which company it is, and you give me answers, and you might not agree to each other, but I may choose who have the good checking record, and I may even switch the vendor without change too much to the data pipeline, right?
Yeah, IP enrichment is a very it's a very messy world of data, right? Like you have a lot of data that's incorrect. You have a lot of IP addresses that have many different people that use them, right? And so it's very much a probabilistic kind of task. And what we find is that no one source of that data is best. They all have their spots where they do better and worse than one another. And so we basically, in order to have the best match rate possible, the most accurate data possible, we basically will use every provider that we can work with.
But I guess it's also hard to get the feedback from the users, right? I guess because you don't really put the raw IP address in your report, and the user may not able to say, sorry, this is not company A, it should be company B. So I guess that may be some challenge, lack of the feedback.
So we do actually allow users to tell us when we get it wrong. I think there are lots of times where you don't know because it wasn't you doing the download or the page view, and so some new company shows up and it's hard to verify that. But what will happen from time to time is they'll see certain activities and they say, oh no, this was us, or no, that we know who this was. It was, customer A. And we let them tell us, hey, no, this event is incorrect, or no, this event is incorrect. And I know the actual identity of this company. It's this company. And so we actually have a system where our users can correct us and give us that feedback over time. And what happens then is we're building up our own mapping of IP address to companies that we can use ourselves as well. And that's something that we have a much higher confidence in because our users told us.
Yeah, and all those is based on this like not the original IP address, it's the maybe MD5 digest or whatever that is.
Correct. Yeah, it's like a salted hash of these kinds of things. And so we actually have to keep track of multiple different notions of a unique source of any given traffic. We have 2 different kinds of IDs, one that we call an endpoint ID, which is essentially a salted and hashed IP address. And then we also have what we call an origin ID, which might go even further and use things like the user agent and any other headers that we deem might be identifying. Basically, what we find is that these 2 different notions of uniqueness are more or less appropriate given the circumstance, right? You might have 1,000 developers all on the same corporate network, and you don't want all of those people to look the same, right? But at the same time, you also don't necessarily you may at times want to make sure that you have some kind of static identifier given a particular endpoint. And so we tend to track both of these notions of uniqueness over time, and those give a little bit of a different read depending on the situation.
Cool. And regarding the maintenance of the infra, you mentioned most of the stack is on AWS, and for the Kafka, for the ClickHouse, is that somehow you just using EKS or EC2 to run by yourself, or you leverage certain vendor or managed cloud services?
Yeah, so our Kafka is AWS managed, so we don't do a whole lot there to manage that. Fortunately, it just has been working pretty well for us. I guess we only ever hit one issue with that. Was one time we actually wanted to scale down the cluster size. We were a bit over provisioned, and AWS does not make it easy to scale the cluster down. You actually need to recreate it from scratch.
I also use the MSK a little bit. I do see there's a button and maybe introducing some downtime. I'm not sure that to change the image size.
Exactly. They make it very painful to downsize the cluster. Fortunately, though, our traffic generally has always been growing. And so we've only ever needed to make it bigger, and it hasn't really been a problem, except one time where we accidentally over provisioned. For ClickHouse, we work with a vendor called Altinity, which has been great. And I would highly recommend them. For ClickHouse management, they basically just like fully manage our ClickHouse cluster for us, and they provide support when we need it.
So the infrastructure is still on your own AWS account, and you somehow allow them to do the upgrade, do the troubleshooting, do the performance tuning, things like that.
Yeah, it's on-prem. It's on-prem. They have the access to manage it for us. And they also give us like nice dashboards and stuff around cluster performance and metrics and these kinds of things as well.
Cool. Yeah. And, but all those things is basically leveraging your own choice of programming language, right? I guess in one of your meetup, you mentioned you even contributed some of the class driver for Haskell, the language. Do you also use that for connect to the Kafka or other integrations?
We don't use that for connecting to Kafka. Yeah, the Haskell ecosystem had a pretty good Kafka library. It did not have a good Haskell library that we liked. And so, yeah, I think by the time listeners are hearing this, the ClickHouse library should be open sourced. I believe we're targeting the end of the month, and we're recording on Jan 29 to get this out the door. And so, yeah, we put a end of January timeline for ourselves to open source our Haskell ClickHouse client.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and also talking about ClickHouse itself, it is also very special open source software and also have a certain commercial business plan. Like, also, if you try to convince someone to also get inspired by your tech stack and do something similar, what's the top 3 reasons you think they should try ClickHouse? Or on the other hand, what's the top 3 thing you should be very pay attention to avoid some of the common mistakes for using ClickHouse?
Yeah, I mean, I think reasons why ClickHouse is why we like ClickHouse at the moment. I think one, it's just really fast. It's really, really fast, and so that has let us really deliver like fully flexible dashboards to our users that are just fully real time. This is obviously not the only system that delivers this kind of thing. I mean, I'm sure you can talk about Timeplus here as well a bit, but it really kind of gave us an experience of writing familiar SQL, still having basically like a database that we are talking to, and having all of the ways of reasoning about interacting with a database that we were familiar with, and also having like a very full-featured dialect of SQL that had a lot of really great functions out of the box that helped us iterate really quickly, even when we didn't really know ClickHouse ourselves when we started. And so that was a really big benefit for us. There was just having this like really fully fledged ecosystem, a familiar kind of database to work with, but like getting sub-second queries for billions of events was not something that we were easily able to find otherwise. I think some gotchas with it that we ran into, and I think, I have a whole talk that I gave at a ClickHouse meetup about this that I'd recommend folks check out if you want to dive into it deeper. It's definitely the kind of technology where you need to know a lot about your data and how you're going to use it so you can architect your schema correctly. There's a lot of ways you can shoot yourself in the foot by having a bad schema. And I think that's much more than something like Postgres, which can be a bit more forgiving with things like deletes and joins and all these things that can be much more painful in ClickHouse if you need to alter your schema or, God forbid, change your index. And then, everything laid out on disk needs to be reordered, and that can be quite painful. And so I think like if you're getting into using one of these kinds of real-time OLAP systems and you don't really know a lot about the domain that you are building around, I think you can end up suffering a lot of headaches and it'll be really expensive. And yeah, that can be really tricky. Yeah, and I think the other thing about ClickHouse is just it's not super cheap to operate. I think it is definitely one of those things where it was quick to build with and quick to deliver, and it's high quality, but it's pricey for sure as well because it's very memory hungry as well.
Yeah. ClickHouse certainly is like some other the language you choose. That is, there's certainly something they do very, very well. At the same time, they are also very strongly opinionated. You needed to do certain things in a certain
Very
ways.
opinionated, yeah.
Yeah, the schema thing is also definitely there are so many tuning on different data type, on the schema, on the index. Even for me and also our team, we extensively build our product on top of ClickHouse. But in many ways, that is when we see a customer define their schema, we can always say, yeah, there's always room to input that schema, right? So you should choose this codec, choose this index, you write this query this way. There's so many room to improve, but you have to understand a lot on the detail side.
A lot of gotchas. Yeah, I think it was one of those things where if we didn't have the support that we were getting during that process, I think we would have had a really rough time migrating onto it.
Yeah. And also more like a shameless part that is for Timeplus, what we do that is we really embrace the powerful ClickHouse, but we also try to solve the problem that is you can get data from Kafka, for example, if you directly write to the ClickHouse side, and you might leverage their Kafka engine and together with some materials view, but the join will be limited on the ClickHouse side, and the materials view is triggered based on the data write on for example, on a tumble window, on a hopping window. There's some. Also, you might run into too many workload on your ClickHouse to have too many materials viewed, have too many table with Kafka engine. Some of our users, no matter on the open source side or on the commercial side, they put Timeplus between the Kafka and the ClickHouse. So Timeplus become this more like a pre-processor, right? Get data from Kafka, process it in the real time, handle those late event or out of order event, do some join, and write this data in ClickHouse in a more high quality way, right? You may know that is in the concept of Databricks, they have this bronze, silver, gold data, and you use some kind of sort of DBT or some Spark job to move from one state to the other state. You can't have everything in ClickHouse, but in our case, you can leverage Timeplus to do those data transformation, enrichment, and quality, and put those high quality data in ClickHouse just for the serving layer. So yeah, that's something we can explore. Cool. And maybe there's also something we cannot ignore these days is the open source, especially open source data model, LLM vs the closed one. And also, I also get the idea that there are so many languages, they try to be killing Python, but now with the AI, especially with those code generation, Python just will be the no-brainer choice, right? AI can generate a much better Python code compared to a relative new library or new language. So I assume that is you also see the trend because you actually handle many of those traffic, right? So there's anything you want to share with our audience regarding the rise of Python and also, for example, DeepSeek? I guess you might have something to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple interesting trends that we've been seeing. I mean, I think the Python one is a really interesting thing to mention because on one hand, yeah, I think you're 100% correct that a lot of the warts that we might encounter with any given programming language are they're much less painful when you're having an LLM like write all your code for you. It just doesn't matter quite as much going forward. At the same time, we're also seeing a lot of adoption around other, whether it's DSLs or full-blown programming languages around AI. I think technology like Mojo from Modular trying to basically supersede and build off of Python, but deliver a fully new programming language that is more purpose built for broad scale machine learning and AI approaches is actually quite interesting, and they are seeing quite a bit of adoption, which has been really exciting to watch. But yeah, I think the other really amazing trend that we get to see is, across all these different companies that we work with, all these different organizations that we work with, there's a lot of redistribution of open source software that we get to take part in. And so one of the ways that that's been really interesting is that we have many different users that have been redistributing different LLM foundational models. And so over the last weekend, we got to see in the data reflected across all of these different projects, DeepSeek really start to take off. Watching people or getting to see the interactions with DeepSeek from, we're seeing big companies interact with DeepSeek and start to try it for the first time. Even government organizations that are getting started with these kinds of approaches, because this stuff is open source. Like you said at the beginning of this discussion, like there's really no barrier of entry to using this kind of software, right? And getting the government to use new technology is typically a very slow process, a very painful process. But when we're actually going to be putting out a report about some of the stuff very soon, but governments around the world are using open source. And we have the very hard evidence of that. And we have seen even government usage and interaction of DeepSeek over the last weekend, and getting to watch that adoption happen in real time has been super interesting. And it does seem like our data suggests that DeepSeek R1 is likely one of the fastest growing LLMs so far. Tons of bursts around things like, the Llama 3 launch was a really big one, but DeepSeek appears to be a fundamentally different one in terms of just the pace and the kinds of organizations that are starting to use it.
Cool. Yeah. And it just occurred to me that do you also integrate with, say, Hugging Face, those model serving catalog, or
today we don't
coming from the Docker Hub?
Yeah, so we can sit in front of Docker Hub. We don't directly integrate with Hugging Face right now. If anyone from Hugging Face is listening, I would love to talk.
Cool.
But we do work with folks that help track stuff on Hugging Face. And so you can use a Scarf tracking pixel to embed inside of a README that would get rendered on Hugging Face. And so we do have customers and users that are tracking which companies are downloading their models from Hugging Face by way of loading those pages on Hugging Face in a way that we can pick up with Scarf. But I would love to be partnering with Hugging Face so we can actually hook into the downloads of these models and all the artifacts that might be on any of these repositories. But today, as of the time of talking about this right now, we do not have that kind of integration yet.
Yeah, because I guess it will. Yeah, it's certainly doable to, as a administrator for the repo, we change the README a little bit, and also all the doc compose file or those Helm chart, we leverage Scarf as the entry point. But there's still some effort to change, right? So I'm not sure whether that's feasible. That is, it would be great if you guys can just provide as a plugin to different systems. Hey, this is a GitHub app. This is a Hugging Face app. You enable this. You don't have to change anything else.
We are working very hard on this right now, actually. Yeah, I think partnerships is one of our top things right now. And, I would love if you could basically just click a button and have all of your historical data just ready to go in Scarf as well. We are actually quite close to having some of those first partnerships in place. Because, ideally, you wouldn't have to instrument Scarf at all. It would just kind of be there, and you'd have all the data historical. But currently today, you have to instrument one way or another, and we can't retroactively collect data for you as well. Is something that we are definitely working on improving, and is one of the top things that I am working on this year.
Yeah, and also people just using the regular GitHub or Docker Hub URL or that Slug, and under the news, some of the traffic will be analyzed by Scarf. That would be great.
Yeah.
And also back to that LLM or Python topic, I guess, those LLM really going to influence us a lot, right? For example, if you just type, create a to-do app using Python, and they create a working app, but imagine somehow the LLM figure out this is the popular library, this is the popular framework. It'll be very different for a tool provider open source project. And I don't know how this business model will be. It's not really as Google Ads, right? But if somehow LLM decided that this is a much better new library, and they just generate the code for the user, and the user don't really have to learn what's the usage of that library. It just work, right? So it will change this new project. There'll be no code star. There'll be, again, there's a lot of influence LLM can play, but also this can be dangerous in the same way, because even the open source model, the paper there, the weight, those are my number there, it's still very difficult to understand how LLM works, right? So it's basically it's a black box with some of the parameters you don't really understand this so well. So how you can making sure the LLM is not going to influence the way in some way you don't really want. That's it's hard to predict and to examine.
Yeah, I think it is definitely marking a shift for a lot of open source developers and these companies behind these projects that content marketing becomes more important than ever, right? Like, how is the LLM going to learn about how to use your project? And how is it going to learn that your library is the right one to use? Well, the answer is you have to have a lot of people talking about it. It needs to be, in as many places on the internet as possible so that the kind of scanning that these companies are doing to train their models pick it up. And that's, I think, one of the, we see this on the Haskell side of things, that LLMs still kind of suck at writing Haskell just because there's a lot less Haskell content online. There's less training data that teaches an LLM how to write Haskell code versus how to write Python or JavaScript or TypeScript, right? And just the more content there is on like Stack Overflow and these places about how to use X technology, the better the LLMs get with that technology. And it's kind of the new SEO in a way, right? Like it's not that SEO has gone away, but it's definitely transformed into how we think about it. And so content has become more important than ever, I think.
Yeah. In the same time, someone mentioned that you have it sounds like a full-time job to tell whether this content is by human being or from AI. And we don't want to waste time to read a very lengthy document, which is not really generated by a human. It's a lot of kind of cuisine and all those things. And also in the same time, that is, as we mentioned, that it's the popular of Python and say Mojo. If someday those LLM can generate a code based on Mojo, then suddenly it can be very good for the Mojo. And also if they somehow integrate with Scarf, for example, to know what is the popular Python library, and they can change the code generation based on the popularity of the library and based on your data points. That would be great.
Yeah, that's actually I like that idea a lot. We've been talking internally about publicly facing metrics for a long time, because right now all data that you collect in Scarf is totally private to you. We make no judgments about like who you want to share your data with. Having said that, we haven't built a lot of tools to help you share your data and like make that available to others and stuff. And so I do over time love the idea of helping people and AI agents, LLMs, et cetera, pick the right tools for the job. I think that's something that we will be able to do much more effectively as we grow, right? Like I think we have, in terms of all of open source usage, we still only see probably a small slice of it. There's so much of it that small slice has a lot of useful stuff in it, but it's not comprehensive enough, I would say, to really be a great reference for something like this yet. But every day that's becoming less and less true.
Yeah. That's the exact reason why we are in this space of data developer and AI. This is so exciting. There's a lot of unknown, but there's a lot of potential. We can do something very differently and beneficial to all of us.
So much potential.
Cool. So it's almost coming to the end of the episode. I'm not sure, Avi, do you have anything else you want to mention about your product, your service, or some of the tech trend you want to share your opinion with the audience?
Yeah. So I think again, for anyone that's out there building, especially building a business around an open source project, I think I would really encourage you to think carefully about how you want to track the success of your work and how you want to help ensure the success of your work. I think usage analytics and open source has been one of those things that has been like a very touchy subject for a long time, but we're increasingly in a spot where, the community has demonstrated that there is a right way to do this. It can be done in a way that is privacy conscious. It's not violating any kind of community trust or guidelines or these kinds of things if it's done in a responsible way. And so I would really encourage folks to have a look at what we're up to with Scarf, and definitely give it a try. We have a very broad and useful free tier, because we always want to be useful for open source projects, even if they are not commercial in any kind of way. And so, check us out at scarf.sh. Yeah, if you'll be at conferences like KubeCon or State of OpenCon in a couple of weeks here, don't hesitate to reach out and say hi. And always happy to chat with folks that want to learn more.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and thank you for joining this episode and sharing your business, sharing your passion about open source and a little bit about your data stack. It's very inspiring. And so that's conclude our episode, and see you in the next one. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks for having me.